Hello and welcome to Recap Radio. I'm Diego Cupolo, Editor-in-Chief of Turkey Recap, and this is our show about Turkish politics and foreign policy. The news cycle is spinning fast in 2026, and so are the narratives used to explain what's happening all around us. The use of information to promote a particular cause or point of view is nothing new. It used to be called spin or propaganda before more recent terms like misinformation and disinformation. But throughout history, just about everyone has sought to tell their story, their way, and the current Turkish government is no different. Through a network of government-friendly media companies that own about 90% of the mainstream media in Turkey, President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and his Justice and Development Party, AKP, have been able to shape their stories like few other governments in Ankara. To do so, they've made use of new technologies and new international news platforms like TRT World to broadcast global news on their terms, which they do while also fine-tuning government messaging through the Directorate of Communications, a Turkish state institution that combats disinformation established in 2018. With the fast-paced developments we're seeing today, there's no better time for a crash course on media and communication strategies in the new Turkey. To cover that and more, I'm speaking to Bilge Yeşil, a professor of media culture at the College of Staten Island and author of the book, Talking Back to the West, How Turkey Uses Counter-Hegemony to Reshape the Global Communication Order. Let's get into it. Thanks for joining us, Bilge.
Thanks for having me here.
So to start, from your point of view, how is Turkey perceived in the U.S. today? And how does the Erdogan government want Turkey to be perceived in the U.S. and globally?
Okay. So in recent years, Turkey has been in the news, especially in international coverage in U.S. news media, whenever there is a major crisis. So this could be anything ranging from the political to the economic or to, like other crises. So the most recent big coverage that Turkey received in the U.S. news was when the February 2023 earthquakes happened. So that received a lot of coverage. Before that, I remember 2016 failed coup attempt coverage. And before that, obviously, the 2013 Gezi protests. So at times of these, like major pivotal events that affect Turkey and the region, that is the Middle East, then Turkey is in the news. But it is generally depicted as this place or as this country that is, again, like ridden with crisis. Other than that, Turkey does not receive much regular coverage as opposed to other, like countries, say Russia or China or India or Brazil. And oftentimes, like when I watch the news coverage in Turkey of, for example, Erdogan's visits to the White House, obviously this is, like 24/7 coverage on Turkish news media. But to the dismay of Erdogan and his communication proxies, unfortunately, it does not even make the news here in the US. And also, like when Turkey is covered, it is generally covered from the perspective of, rising authoritarianism of Erdogan or the economic crisis, or as I mentioned earlier, other political or environmental issues. So there's not a lot of emphasis on, like cultural or social or political polarization in Turkey, but it is generally from the perspective of, like specific events, right? How Erdogan and his government want Turkey to be perceived is completely different, right? And this is what I've noticed when I was doing the research for this book. And over many years, I followed, like English language outlets that are run by the Erdogan government and his loyal media bosses. And I've noticed that in terms of content, in terms of, Turkey's self-image, there are a few objectives that they are focusing on. One is a promotional, that is to promote Turkey in a positive light, to project Turkey as a regional power, and even at times as a rising great power, as the heir to the great Ottoman Empire. So in addition to this, promotional projection and promotional efforts, Turkey is also presented as a country that plays a big role in global conflict resolution. So there's a lot of emphasis, for example, on Turkey's role between, Russia and Ukraine, and Russia, Ukraine, and the United States in terms of, resolving the issue. And it is also presented as a major peacemaker, as a benevolent global power that is providing aid and assistance to, especially, refugees in Turkey, Syrian refugees mostly, and also the it the government and its communication outlets or initiatives is also presenting Turkey as a defender of, oppressed peoples. This is not so much, that kind of coverage that we find in the news, but generally in, documentaries or, other special programs or political talk shows, op-eds in newspapers, or, the webinars or panels that are organized by different government institutions in different, European and American cities. So this, the guardianship of the oppressed peoples, especially the guardianship of the oppressed Muslims around the world and in Global South, is another promotional effort. In addition to these, promotional objectives, there's of course, the legitimation of Erdogan's policies, both domestic and foreign policies. So a lot of times, whenever there is a political, economic, or geopolitical tension between, say, Turkey and France, or Turkey and European Union, or Turkey and the US, then, we see a lot of coverage and from the perspective of Erdogan's domestic and foreign policy. So in this regard, Turkey is presented as, the country that is doing the right thing, and oftentimes its adversaries, like France, UK, European Union, what have you, are presented in a negative light. So there's a lot of criticism. Speaking of criticism, the third objective of this global communication apparatus, especially in English language, is to present Turkey and Turkish civilization, Turkish Islamic civilization, as superior to the Western civilization. So there is also a lot of criticism of the West, that is basically, US, Europe, and Israel, in terms of how they are, acting hypocritically, how they are not holding up their own civilizational values. And this can include, the international law, human rights, and, human dignity, how they are trampling on these, these values that, they have built over, decades and centuries. So there is that, inherent criticism of Western civilization and the West as something, hypocritical, as duplicitous, as a civilization that is also in decline. So there's a lot of emphasis on political, economic, and, social, cultural crises that are afflicting these countries, especially United States and European countries. So there's emphasis on, let's say, homelessness and poverty and police brutality, and social political polarization, to depict the West and Western civilization in decline. So these are, the general objectives of this global communication apparatus.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to dig into the specific strategies and narratives. But before we do that, can we just lay out the different outlets that are providing these government narratives? To list a few, we have TRT World in English, we have TRT streaming platform Tabi,
Mm-hmm,
Anadolu Agency, the
mm-hmm,
Directorate of Communications, which is part of the government. We also have
mm-hmm.
the SETA think tank and Bosphorus Global. Can you just give us a quick rundown on what these different outlets do and what they try to push forward?
Sure. So this communication apparatus, or this global infrastructure, includes several outlets or organizations, some of them state-run and some of them that are run by, allegedly commercial or independent actors. So the state-run apparatus obviously includes TRT, Anadolu Agency, which are both, run by Directorate of Communications, which was established after the coup attempt. So under the umbrella of Directorate of Communications, we have TRT, Turkish Radio and Television Corporation, for audiences that are not familiar with the state broadcaster. And TRT, since the 2010s, has really expanded its global communication efforts. So TRT World is the 24/7 English language news channel, which TRT officials, liken to the way that BBC World or Al Jazeera English operate. In addition to TRT World, there is also TRT Kurdish and TRT Arabic. These are regional broadcast channels. And in recent years, TRT has also launched several digital news sites. These are not broadcast channels, but they're digital news sites. And they also have, a lot of short form media content. So this includes TRT German, TRT African, TRT Balkans that operate in local Balkan and African languages. There is TRT Persian, TRT Spanish, TRT Russian. I think I mentioned that. So this is, this is also expanding. There's also Voice of Turkey, which has not received a lot of, academic or non-academic attention. And I, hope someone, does a study of this international radio network, because Voice of Turkey broadcasts in 37 languages. And this is also run by TRT. In addition to this, there is, as you mentioned, the State Newswire, Anadolu Agency. It provides news service in 13 languages, and it has more than 40 offices worldwide. And in recent years, Anadolu Agency has also been, establishing these, partnership or cooperation agreements with other state-run agencies around the world. There is loyalist commercial media, including Daily Sabah and Yeni Şafak English and A News, which is, the news counterpart of Daily Sabah. And they all operate, again, provide a news service in English language. Daily Sabah is, I think, more comprehensive in terms of its reach and its coverage than Yeni Şafak English and A News, but nonetheless, they all, amplify pro-government narratives to foreign audiences. There is also the AKP-aligned think tank SETA. Again, for audiences that are not familiar with it, it's the Foundation for Political, Economic, and Social Research. SETA claims that it is an independent international think tank, but as we know, it is very much aligned with AKP, both politically and economically. And what SETA does, it has a website. It also operates, online periodicals, social media accounts. It has, dozens of publications, reports, policy papers, briefings in different languages, English, Arabic. And it also organizes, as I mentioned before, panels or webinars in, Brussels and London, and also in Washington, D.C. here in the United States. So there is this kind of, outreach, both, via media, social media, and also, in these, events. Then there's Bosphorus Global, which is run by Hilal Kaplan, and it was established by Hilal Kaplan and her former spouse, Suheyb Öğüt. And Bosphorus Global is, a mix of a PR agency / a communications agency. They usually do a lot of, social media operations in Turkey. There is a report by Stanford University Internet Observatory that found out that, Bosphorus Global has run, several disinformation campaigns within the borders of Turkey. But outside Turkey, Bosphorus Global also does some kind of, promotional work, either by using, social media, websites, and also by, inviting foreign politicians to Turkey, giving them, opportunities to meet with government officials. One of the most interesting events they did several years ago was to invite Hollywood actor Lindsay Lohan to come and visit the refugee camps that Turkey had set up for Syrian refugees. This was at the beginning of the refugee crisis. And then they arranged, like a meeting with Lindsay Lohan and, like Erdogan and his wife, Emine Erdogan, at the presidential palace. So again, these are all, like efforts to kind of, like attract attention to, like what Turkey is doing in terms of its, like guardianship, in terms of its, like rising profile in the world. Last but not least, in addition to this, like media and communications related outlets or organizations, what I found during my research, and this is interesting to me as a communication scholar, is how much emphasis the state institutions, especially TRT, Anadolu Agency, and also Turkey's like cultural, educational, and development agencies such as TİKA, Yunus Emre Institute, they, like all cooperate and like work together to provide journalism training and media assistance to, like the media outlets or journalism and broadcast professionals in particular regions of the world, that is mostly in the Balkans, Southeast Asia, and Africa. So they either invite like journalists and broadcast professionals to Turkey to receive journalism training, or they go to these, like countries, or sometimes they do, like online training. So there's also a concerted effort on the part of, like the Erdogan government to provide this type of, like training and professional networking opportunities between Turkey and, like these other countries in the global south.
Mhm. Yeah, and in your introduction, you talked about Erdogan trying to be the voice of the voiceless and
Mhm,
showing Turkey as a benevolent actor in the world. So I wanted to move on to this concept of strategic
mhm,
obfuscation, which you highlight in your book, in the thesis of your book, where
mhm,
basically governments try to focus on specific facts and disregard others and simplify complex events to create binaries. Can you explain what obfuscation is in
mhm.
the Turkish context, and are there recent examples?
Yes. When I started, like doing this research several years ago, and like I was systematically following, like all this foreign coverage that TRT World, Anadolu Agency, Daily Sabah, and other organs were being like providing to foreign audiences. And then I was talking to like my colleagues and friends who were also like starting to watch TRT World in addition to Al Jazeera English. And then something that we all noticed was that like a lot of the times that coverage, especially when it came to like the criticism of Turkey's adversaries or criticisms of the Western governments or the Western civilization, these organizations and like media professionals, or this content was not your typical like state propaganda. Like they were not just like lies or falsehoods. Like there was a certain like powerful, so certain like powerful truths that were underpinning this type of coverage, such as the like criticism of the US and its like wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, or criticism of European Union and its policies during the refugee crisis in 2015, 2016, or rising Islamophobia in the West, especially in Europe and in the United States. So these are all powerful truths, right? So when TRT World or Anadolu Agency or Daily Sabah or SETA covered these issues like Islamophobia and the impact of U.S. intervention or Western interventions in the rest of in different parts of the world, these are not lies. Like they were not making up stuff, right? There was truth to it, but the way these issues, or the way these like problems with Western civilization or with Western polities was presented, it was generally like boiled down to binary oppositions, right, between good and evil, us and them, us versus them, like Muslims versus the West, or Turkey versus the West. So this was like strategically like boiling down everything to these binary oppositions, overlooking or papering over like complex realities that underpin these problems or issues, and basically obfuscating like these these social, historical, or political realities, and just like flatten these complexities and create these moral binaries of good versus evil. So that's why I call it strategic obfuscation, because it's strategically to promote Turkey in a positive light, or to criticize the West, and portray the Western civilization as like evil, as inherently evil, or opposed to like Muslims. So this was like obfuscating a lot of the complex realities. An example would be like the coverage of Islamophobia, both in like news reports and in like documentaries, and other like op-eds and other pieces of media content. So it because like the Erdogan government, as I mentioned earlier, wants to present itself as like the guardian of the oppressed Muslims, there's a lot of emphasis on Islamophobia. And we know Islamophobia is not a specifically like European or an American problem, but like there are many instances of like Islamophobia. So there is like selective emphasis on what types of Islamophobia are covered, to what extent, and how critically. So one interesting thing I noticed is that like whenever they cover Islamophobia, these outlets mostly focus on Islamophobia in the West, right? And whenever, for example, they cover the Uyghur genocide in China, like there is really no documentaries produced about that, but there are tons of documentaries about like Islamophobia in the West. So whenever like the injustices against Muslims in China are covered, there is usually like short references to a UN report that is like published, and that is criticizing China. But the critical and extensive perspective focuses on Islamophobia in the West. And when they cover Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hatred in the West, again, as I said earlier, it is presented in a way that is, like found in the inherent character of the West. And, like Erdogan and his proxies always mention, like Islamophobia, quote unquote, as a poison, right? That runs through the Western character, or the Western soul, right? So this means that like this kind of like pits Muslims versus the West. It does not, for example, delve into the complex factors that have like led to the growth of Islamophobia. There is really not a lot of like discussion about like anti-immigrant movements, or the fallout from the financial and economic crisis, and the like anti-immigrant sentiments among like working and middle classes in Europe or the United States. So again, this boils down to good versus evil. So which like means like it is strategic, because it presents Turkey as like the good and the like the benevolent guardian of Muslims, because it is like giving voice to Muslims, and like making sure that like these issues are brought to the attention of the global public opinion, and then like criticizing the West for its inherent like character that is that is always going to be opposed to Muslims, or they're always going to hate Muslims because they're Muslims.
Yeah, I wonder how the mayors of London and New York fit into that narrative. I guess they
Yes.
obfuscate that.
Exactly. That's a great point, because I think one of the challenges that this type of coverage faces is like they don't really know what to do with those instances. For example, during like the Gaza genocide and the pro-Palestine demonstrations on U.S. Campuses, university campuses, right? That was an interesting moment, because if you are making the argument that like the West is like inherently opposed to like Muslims, right, or Arabs, then how do you explain white college kids on American campuses, right, chanting for the rights of Palestinians, for the rights of Muslims, and criticizing the, like the genocide of Palestinians and Muslims at the hands of, like Western powers. So these are moments that I think, like that, like binary opposition does not really work.
Yeah, definitely. And to just kind of take a step back and look at the media landscape overall, because, it is changing. We have a much more digital media
Hmm.
ecosystem where a lot of people get their news on social media.
Hmm.
So, of course, mainstream media is important. And we always, as journalists, we always say that 90% of mainstream media in Turkey is pro government. But I'm
Hmm.
wondering how much that matters anymore and what you think about this, because if so many people are looking at YouTube or social media or different influencers to get their news now, what role does mainstream media in this government consolidation in Turkey play in
Hmm.
2026, right? Is it as important as before? What do you think?
Hmm. Yeah, so we have seen this, like massive migration of, like audiences to digital media. And also, like this migration of, like journalists and, like newsmakers and news producers, and also what we refer to as, like citizen journalists, to social media as well, right? So a lot of the news producers or, like political YouTubers, for example, on that digital platform, that have huge followings used to be once, like on mainstream news outlets in Turkey. So we have, like this very prominent example, like Fatih Altaylı, right? And others, like Rushan Çakır, who, like launched Medyascope several years ago, Nevşin Mengü, and, like Murat Yetkin, and many, many others, right? Can Dündar. So one way or another, these, like um, um, newsmakers, producers, journalists, like political pundits, what have you. Uh, they were once part of the mainstream, and now, like either because they were fired or they resigned or they had to go to self-exile somewhere in Europe, right? They are now using YouTube and other digital outlets to, like provide commentary, to provide, like opinion, to provide the news, right? So they have huge followings, as you know, in Turkey. But um, the relationship between mainstream media and digital news media in Turkey is an interesting one, because it doesn't necessarily mean that, like audiences in Turkey have entirely, like ditched following, like television news. And, like when I say mainstream news media, I use this, like in quotation marks, because as you said, like what exactly is mainstream anymore in Turkey? So that really does not exist. Perhaps, like mainstream was something that we had in, I don't know, in the 1990s or early 2000s. But, like this, when, like television news channels, right, in a country, in Turkey is owned like pretty much to, like 90% by pro-government actors, businessmen, like tycoons, moguls, what have you. And people know that, audiences know that this is pretty much, like news, or commentary or opinion through the lens of the government. Then, like, do they watch it? Do they, believe what they hear or see? Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of research about this, right? But uh, I am thinking that, like these television channels are not entirely dead, because a lot of people still turn to, like these television channels for entertainment, to watch, like weekly serials, dizi. And also there is, like a lot of commentary and opinion and political talk shows that, like draw audiences to a certain extent, maybe not as much as they used to, like 2-3 decades, 2 or 3 decades ago. But um after, like a political talk show is broadcast, right, and we have them on pretty much every channel every night, then the next day usually we see, like clips, or, like some sensational, like segments that are taken from these programs, and then they start, like circulating on digital news, digital platforms, right? Which I think is interesting because a lot of times you will see on YouTube or Instagram and like X, these like short clips, and then it becomes a point of like further debate or deliberation the next day. So I think in that regard, what we see on television news channels, like as they travel to like the digital, in terms of these, like short clips or segments, and then they, like ignite further discussion or debate, that I find interesting. So I'm not saying television news in Turkey, like sets the agenda or it has a huge following or audiences are paying a lot of attention to it. But I think in one way or another, they still turn into these, like short bits of content, right? Either in short video form or as these, like clips and segments, and they circulate on digital platforms, and I think that's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm a journalist. I work in Turkey, and many times I notice that news is usually people talking about something else that was published by
Yep.
a government-approved agency, right? So if
Hmm. Hmm.
Anadolu agency publishes a specific article, then all day different YouTubers, different
Yep.
podcasters try to decipher what that means, and then
Yep.
that becomes a different version of the narrative.
Hmm.
So looking at that complex mess of people talking about different messages and
Hmm.
what they mean, I'm
Hmm.
wondering what what the future looks like for Turkey, because you have such a consolidation of
Hmm.
narratives that the government approves. And when the narrative is not approved, it's very easy to fine people or block their YouTube channel or website
Yeah.
or give them a Rituk fine if they're,
Yeah.
a normal news organization. So have you seen examples where you see consolidation reverse in modern times? Because it does look like there's a tight grip on what's allowed to be said in Turkey, and I'm
Yeah.
wondering if that's just how it's always going to be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah, and it's tightening by the day, right? This is not just like tightening by way of like Rituk fines or like uh blocking an account on like X or other platforms. And by the way, like the Turkish government has very good relationships with these like platforms. So like looking at these platforms as like sites where free speech or oppositional voices can proliferate, it's also very misguided, right? We always have to keep in mind, like how easily these, like foreign platforms, US big tech, will give in to government demands to block an account. And we have seen this, like happen with, like Imamoglu's, like account, and many, many others, right? So leaving that aside, the consolidation is increasing, and like right now we are waiting to see who is going to be the new owner, for example, of Habertürk, right, or what's going to happen to Ekol TV. So we're still waiting, and my hunch is that like this is not just going to be another like pro Erdogan business tycoon, but maybe like someone that is close to the family or from like within the family, because there's also a lot of like talk about how Erdogan is preparing his son Bilal for like succession, and how he's trying to like create a new landscape, not just political, economic, but also a new media landscape that is going to pitch into these like efforts and like legitimizing Bilal Erdogan's future role. So like you said, this like this is an ever tightening grip, both in terms of like ownership, right, who owns the media, in terms of like fines and penalties, but the one other thing is like we need to keep a close eye on is regulation, right? I'm guessing there might be some new like even stricter than what we have right now, even stricter regulation, because remember like the disinformation law was passed, and before that like foreign media platforms, social media platforms were forced to open like offices in Turkey, although there's not like legitimate legal representation in that regard. There is, there are a lot of tools that the government can use, from, ownership, from penalties and fines, from instrumentalizing Rütük, obviously, but also introducing new and ever stricter media laws and regulations. So this might be, new amendments to the internet law. This might be new amendments to the broadcast law. It's unfortunately the future is bleak.
Nice. Well, I mean, the government's very good at what it does, and it's accomplishing its goals. And I think the person that really established the Directorate of Communications is Fahrettin Altun, the former director there,
Mhm.
right? But he
Yep.
had a controversy, which we're not sure about the details, so I won't speculate. But he
Hmm.
was replaced recently, and now there's a new head. So to
Yep.
wrap, uh, Burhanettin Duran is the new head of
Hmm.
the Directorate of Communications.
Yes.
Have you noticed
Mhm.
any changes in the government talking points or narratives since he's taken over? The only thing I've seen is that they've got better graphic designs.
Okay. No, not yet. I have not noticed a particular change in, the narrative or, in messaging. The one thing we need to keep in mind that is that, Burhanettin Duran is not new to any of this, global messaging, right? He has been involved with, SETA, for many years. And, he's also familiar with uh, general, geopolitical, uh, international and domestic legitimation and promotional efforts. Um, and even when, Fahrettin Altun became the director of communications and, this expansion of the global communication infrastructure, most of it happened under his watch. It, even in the very early days, when you look at the general messaging, this is all very much, kind of like a product of Ahmet Davutoğlu's project, right? So this, strategic depth doctrine, Turkey as this, great regional and rising power, as this, heir to the great Ottoman Empire and the guardian of the oppressed, and the civilizational superiority. So a lot of this narrative is the work of Ahmet Davutoğlu and also Ibrahim Kalın, right? Fahrettin Altun, I think, just uh, use this existing, narrative or this, messaging, and TRT, another agency, Daily Sabah and SETA and many others kind of, use this general package. And I don't think, the general messaging will change under Burhanettin Duran's leadership. Maybe, I don't know, some changes in personnel because of, some, I think employees were implicated in the recent criminal investigations. But I don't foresee any changes with respect to this general,
Mm.
narrative of, Turkey as this benevolent rising power.
Great. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
To wrap, that was Bilge Yeşil, a professor of media culture at the College of Staten Island and author of the book, Talking Back to the West, How Turkey Uses Counter-Hegemony to Reshape the Global Communication Order. This podcast is a production of Turkey Recap, a newsletter on Turkish politics, foreign policy, and business. If you like what you heard, visit turkeyrecap.com for more coverage. Turkish language readers and listeners can also follow our political coverage at studiorecap.com. We invite feedback, send us suggestions or questions by email at info@turkeyrecap.com. Stay safe, stay well, and see you next time.